Welcome to the sixth installment of our monthly interview series, Conversations with the Bill Gribbons. I'm Neeta Goplani, a proud graduate of the Human Factors and Information Design Master's Program at Bentley University. In the sixth installment, I'll be asking Bill to share some of his wisdom with us. The series is dedicated to capturing Bill's incredible legacy before his retirement. Each month, a different HFID advisory board member from the program will sit down with Bill, thank you, Bill, to discuss specific topics related to his journey and his immense impact on the field of human factors and information design. Our goal is to create short or long, bite-sized content that provides deep insights and reflections from Bill. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. It's a great pleasure.
Now, of course. And, Bill, we were deciding the theme of this whole talk, and you brought up the whole topic of last lecture. So, what I would love to cover today is within that last lecture, I would love to talk about what is that current state of UX? What are you seeing? And what is that future of UX? So I would love to touch upon those. And, we talked about it. It's such a great topic. So with that, I would love to connect on some of the conversations we were having, right? It's like you've seen the great days that we've had within the field of UX, and then you've seen not so great days. So I would love your perspective on, what do you see happening now? What is that current state? And why do you think, what's happening is happening right now?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things that are happening right now. And I think we are at a really a critical stage in the profession, in the life and the development and the evolution of the profession. And I think we'll get to the point where, I use the word profession, but I think part of the problem is we may not be a profession. To be a profession, you have to have certain things. And usually these things develop and evolve over time. And I kept waiting and waiting, and it really hasn't happened. And every time we make progress, there's backsliding. And I think we find ourselves at one of those pivotal moments right now. And there are two things going on from my perspective. One is, and I'll begin here. We were just talking about this in HF 700 last night, and I'm saying like, okay, I didn't want to depress you on your last class of the semester after working so hard. So I still believe the profession does so much good and brings, so much value, to the world, to everyone, but in particular, we have tremendous potential. And I think the Bentley program has been a leader in really working with marginalized populations, the people who need us most, the people I think who have been forgotten by the tech industry and the corporate world and so on and so forth. And creating, usable, inclusive, accessible design. So again, we don't want to lose that. We should start on a positive note, and it's your job to make sure we finish on a positive note as well. But I think we also have to deal with, we can't stick our head in the sand and say everything is rosy and it doesn't require our attention. I think, one of the challenges that we face now, and it's the same challenge we faced, 4 years ago in the dot-com boom. And, some of you remember that, is there was just an explosion of people coming into the field. There were more jobs than there were people, and floodgates, opened, and, people came in who were not qualified. And I give people credit for doing that, but again, a profession requires preparation. It requires, education. It requires a fairly codified practice. And when you're hiring tens of thousands of people a year, and the demand exceeds the supply, then those standards go down, and you're looking for warm bodies. And I think that happened in 1997, 98, 99, and then 2000, 2001, it blew up and the bubble broke. And I think we all, many of us remember that, is, again, tens of thousands of people laid off and tens of thousands of people leaving the profession, and, people talking about doom and gloom and the profession is dead and all of those kinds of wonderful things. And it came back. It came back. It was almost needed that reset. It needed that reset. And what do? We find ourselves in the same kind of boom and bust cycle right now, 20 years later, where, let's take the last 2 years and put them aside. But, besides that, the last 20 years has been boom.
Yeah.
The buildup of hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people coming into the field, some incredibly competent and capable, and others less so. And I think we just have to be honest about that. And I think that has, I think, tarnished the reputation of the field. There's a lot of silly research being done out there.
Hmm.
I mean, that does not deliver value. When I look at, and I won't name companies, but I look at large financial institutions just in the Boston area who lay off their entire UX research team. The entire team. How
Yeah.
could they possibly do that if they knew the value that research brought? So either they weren't delivering value or they weren't communicating the value they brought. And you see this over and over again. That's not an isolated incident. We've seen this over and over again over the last 2 or 3 years where entire teams have been let go. And I think what happens is during these boom years is, we kind of take our eye off the ball.
Yeah.
And we start doing silly things, and we don't start thinking about, should we be investing in this research and what's the return. I think we always have to be careful of following the bottom line, because that's going to be an issue we'll talk about later. But again, if we're not doing that, then this kind of thing happens where people are simply let go. So I think that's one thing that's going on in the field right now. The second thing is probably on the opposite end of the continuum or the spectrum, is we've gotten so good at what we've done. And I think it's exposed a dark side of the profession, of where I think we all got into this, myself as a behavioral scientist, because we wanted to bring good to people's lives. We wanted to remove the pain and the suffering, the drudgery, and that technology brought into the world for me, back in the 80s and the 90s, and make it better, and allow them to, discover and reveal the full value that technology could bring to their lives. And, we were cleaning up the usability problems, and we were making things accessible, and so on and so forth. And we went from there to where we've gotten so good at understanding human behavior, that we've now, kind of crossed the line. And it's not a magic line, but it's a tipping point where, we're using that same deep understanding of human behavior to manipulate people, and to create the addictive technologies. So, as an aside, to those who are listening, we were talking, as we were planning for this session, we were talking about the Buy Now, documentary that's on Netflix. And again, nothing in that documentary surprised me, but it depressed me. I could not sleep that night after watching it. Took several glasses of wine to get over it, and
A bottle.
it didn't work. It didn't
It
work.
did not work. And,
And
I think, go
yeah,
on,
go
sorry.
ahead. Go.
No, I was just going to say, like, just that documentary, I'm so glad, Bill, you'd mentioned it, because I think everyone in the field of UX should watch that. So, this is a message. Buy Now at Netflix. I think you should watch it, because the visceral reaction that you have watching it and seeing that, oh, people like us are going to the dark side. Some of us
Yeah.
are, and this is the impact that's having. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I don't think we're aware of it. And
we're
again,
not.
I hate to use the slippery slope analogy, but it's exactly what happens. And as I explain this in class now, and I have to admit, I was there at the beginning.
Yeah.
I remember people coming into the UXC in the the late 90s, and they said, can you make a website sticky? And sticky seemed quite innocent, didn't it? Get somebody to linger for another 15 seconds, and maybe there would be an unintended purchase. That's capitalism. That's okay. I can live with that.
Yeah.
Stop people from using the search by having good, effective wayfinding, because we know when they're wayfinding to find the product they want to buy, they're going to buy something along the way. That all seemed good. We went from that, which I think is acceptable. Some people may not find it acceptable, but I think it was reasonable, to where now we've built addictive stuff, where we've removed all the friction, and we have the data, we have the knowledge, we're monitoring people real time, and we know how to get them to buy now. And it's not just buy now.
Yeah.
It's a bet now. You look at the gambling apps and again, the dating apps where the dating apps originally were about finding, companionship and love and
Which is the
partnership.
good.
And
Yeah.
and now they realize that, my God, if we give people companionship and love, we've lost a customer. So as soon as you find love, they're going like, oh, we've got somebody better for you.
Yeah.
And that is dark. That is
That is
evil.
dark. That is
It
dark.
is. And there's so many stories of problem gamblers who finally find the willpower to say, I'm not going to bet on football this weekend. And I won't name anyone, they all do it, but
Oh,
they'll on Monday morning, they'll be sending them free tokens and bets, and they'll lure them back in. They
they're
they
luring
won't
them
let them
back
stay
in.
away.
No,
So, again, and who does that? We do it. We do it.
we do
And we
it.
know exactly how to do it. We have raised it to an art form. We understand that behavioral science so deeply. We understand human vulnerabilities so deeply. We understand the way the mind works and how to release those neurotransmitters and trigger that so that we create an addictive experience. And we know what works today is not going to work tomorrow. And so how do we keep ratcheting it up? We've turned it into an art form. And
We've
that's got to
turned.
stop. That's got to stop. We've got to acknowledge the fact that we did it, that we contributed to it, and how do we push back? And that's not going to be easy because all of this has contributed to that bottom line that we talked about before.
And
Um,
Bill, that's interesting also, right? Because one of the things within the documentary and the woman from Amazon was talking about, like, I was there doing my job, but I didn't know what was
I
happening
know.
after my job, right?
Yep.
So to the listeners, like to some, to the ones who are doing these and designing, like what advice do you have? Like, how do we raise our heads up and see what else is happening? Like, what can we do
Yeah.
actionable to do some of these things?
Yeah, and I think some of it is just to be more self-aware
Yeah.
individually and then within our groups. I often describe it in classes, just, have the conversation. These conversations are not happening
Yeah.
within our teams. I
Yeah.
think that's number one. Number one is self-awareness,
Yeah.
is to be honest with ourselves. I've done a lot of self-reflection. I realize I've educated probably more people in this field than anybody, and I've probably contributed to this. And I've been naive thinking everybody was going to use this behavior to good ends, and without really cautioning them that and saying, let's be honest about this. You can just flip this, and everything that I'm talking about using in a good way can be used in an evil way and in an unethical way to manipulate people and to control people, particularly at that subconscious level. And for me personally, and I'm not sure if I shared this in another one of the sessions, so I apologize if I'm repeating. This is the reason why I left advertising, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
is there's a dark side of advertising. And this was print media. But again, where I was teaching people, in advertising classes, and the theory of advertising is to create need. Sometimes you have to tear people down to use the product and service as a way of building them back up and what they want to aspire to.
Beauty industry.
Oh my God. And we were
We did.
doing that with
Yeah.
print advertising. Now you think about the power of digital and you think of the power of AI and all of that. It is supercharged.
It is
And
supercharged.
small wonder we're seeing the rates of depression among,
Oh,
our teenagers and young adults that we're seeing today. We've
yeah.
destroyed them. And so we've got to think about that now. So let's come back to positive, and
Yeah.
and I think Bentley should be proud. Bentley is the first school that started talking about this. My last
Mm.
lecture in 700 15 years ago started being this. I was kind of soft pedaling it in the beginning because I didn't want to get preachy. I'm very preachy now. There's no
As you
hold.
should be.
There's no
Mm.
holding back. Yeah, I know, and I think you had to kind of feel it out. It was more like a warning. You got to think about it. But
Yeah.
now I'm very, very direct about it. And we were the first program, 5 years ago to develop a design ethics class. That's in the program. It's in our master's program. It's in our PhD program where we talk about these very issues. This is not happening in design schools. It's definitely not happening in engineering schools.
Yeah.
And there's two sides of it. We do the front end of it. There's somebody who's enabling this on the back end. And engineering schools are not talking about that. All they talk about is designing, building things and coding things that work and meet certain
Because they're
requirements.
in their bubble
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
were in
that
our bubble.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, and we've got to break out of that. So coming back to being self-aware,
Yeah.
having these conversations in our groups.
Yeah.
I think there's strengths in numbers. I point to, over the last, 4 years, there's been a number of instances like at Microsoft where they were developing surveillance technology that was going to be really biased against, particularly brown and black people.
Yeah.
And it was going to be used in unethical ways. They had good intentions, but we know how it was going to be used. And the entire team walked out and said, we won't participate. They
And that's
can't
a
do the
really good example.
Yeah, they can't do the work without us. They can't
Yeah.
do the work without us. And so when we stand up in mass and say enough is enough,
Yeah.
what is reasonable profit? And this is not sustainable. It can't just be more and more and more. And this is the world that we've built, particularly for publicly traded companies. If
Yeah.
they're not showing 15-20% growth, the CEO's fired.
Yeah.
So you look at their motivation is it's not to do ethical things and it's not to say like
No.
what's reasonable growth. They're
No.
not asking those questions. So I think that needs to happen as well and within our groups and again strength in numbers. And lastly, and this is one I've never been able to quite figure out. And you're an exception, and there are others in the program that were exceptions, but we've never really elevated ourselves into the C level, positions. And I don't know why that is.
Mhm.
Whether it's a personality type that comes into our field or what it is. I also teach in our MBA program, and I'm looking at these MBA program students, and it's a horrible thing for me to say, but who are not nearly as capable as the students that we have in our program,
Mhm.
and they become the leaders.
They do. Yeah.
They do. And then we end up working for them and we end up following all of this bad direction that they're setting for us, the course they're setting for us. So I think we have to do something, and maybe that's a failure again of us, as a program, or as educationally, is maybe we haven't inspired our students to do that. We haven't maybe demonstrated the ability to do that. Why can marketing people do this? Why can finance people do this? Why can the engineering team do this? We're closer to the consumer than anybody. We know the consumer better and more intimately than anybody in the C-suite. So why
Yeah.
aren't we assuming those roles? And then we can set the direction for the company. And again, you're gonna have to be willing to, pay the price if the shareholders and the board is not happy with you. That's a whole other problem. That's a societal problem.
That's a societal and systemic problem.
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, what's your thought on? I'm seeing a lot of CXO level roles show up, so Chief Experience Officer. So some of us within the field are getting into that
Yeah.
C-suite within the
Yeah.
CXO. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, and I think this is where we need to, bring to the table is again, and I don't know the answers. I can't
Yeah.
pretend to say how you have this conversation, but this conversation has to be had. If we're again producing a generation of people who are not coming out of their rooms, they're
Yeah.
not going to be consumers.
No.
They are not going to be good consumers. They are not going to be good workers. I mean, these are
Hmm.
also the employees of the future.
Hmm.
And so I think we have to think about this next generation that's coming along and what we've done to them. And again, they're not going to be the people you want working for you. They're not going to be the people who are going to be consuming things. I think, and I hear this from young people, is I think young people are becoming more informed about some of the stuff that's going on
Yeah.
and how they've been being manipulated and how all of this stuff is controlling them. And that's the good thing about human behavior is once people become that self-aware, they push back. People do not like being manipulated.
Yeah.
So once you pull back the curtain and kind of reveal what's going on, right now all of this is going on subconsciously, but once you pull back the curtain, it was just like advertising. I used to teach courses, 40 years ago of the dark side of advertising. And once
Hmm.
students took that course, they're going like, it's not going to influence me the same way again. I'm
No,
now aware. I'm
I can
aware of
see
what
through
they're
it.
doing. And you're
Yeah.
not only am I aware, but because this brand is tearing me down in order to
Yeah.
sell a product, I'm never going to buy from them.
Absolutely.
And it's exactly what we need to do here. Once people will become aware of what TikTok's doing and Instagram is doing, and whatever the betting application, gambling application is, and the dating apps, and so on and so forth. Once they become aware, and then I look at it and say, then coming back to your CX role, I've always seen this. Then this is a business opportunity.
Absolutely.
This is
Yeah.
this is an opportunity to say we're going to be different. We're going to be different, and this is where disruption happens. And
Yeah.
these are the things that we talk about in innovation classes and the MBA classes. You look for vulnerabilities in the marketplace, and then you disrupt. Again, as a startup, you have very different profit expectations versus a mature company where it's got to be growth, growth, growth. Here you have different expectations, so you can set the growth more reasonably and say, we're going to do it a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's just one side note. There was this whole interesting thing how DEI became such a big thing, and the whole greenwashing became like, we're green and everything. So it all goes back to how do we come back and we're like, no, let's hold you accountable,
Yeah.
like, around these things. And if we are at those levels, we can have those conversations to influence all the
Yeah.
leaders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I don't want us to lose sight of the thread. It's my fault,
Yeah, yeah,
not
of course.
yours. Because I was laughing when you said we're going to keep this short and simple, because that's
Oh, I know, right?
never the case with me. But again, it comes back to the things that really worry me about the field, and it's the field operating within this corporate culture, and then all of these other societal forces that are going on as well. We need to talk a lot more about this. We're not having this discussion. We're just not having this discussion.
And kudos for the ethics program because you're right. Our field, design field does not have it. Engineering field does not have it. Medical field has it.
Has it?
We
Yeah.
need to have it.
Yeah, and you know what? And we have a code of ethics in the UXPA. I wonder how many people have read it. We have one in Chi. We have one in Human Factors and Ergonomic Society. But I see bad things going on in every one of those disciplines. So we're not alone. We're not alone. And again, I understand it's hard. As one student said in class last night, he said, well, we bring this up in our team, and what we hear from our managers, if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it.
And that's the thing, strength in numbers then.
Yep. Yep. And that's exactly what it has to be. And somebody has to have the courage to be different.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think a
absolutely.
lot of it is, I think a lot of it is, any publicly traded company, they're in the business of making money, and it's all about profit. And it really doesn't matter how they make it.
Yeah.
The shareholders don't care, the board doesn't care.
Yeah.
So maybe, and again, I've seen this over the years. I don't talk about it as much anymore because you just don't see it as often. But, privately held companies behave differently. They build better
Because
product.
you don't have the same pressures. You're
Yeah,
right.
no, they build better product because they eliminate all of that pressure and all of those external forces. And so maybe some of that. But again,
Yeah.
we see it a counterforce to that. If you have a little bit movement there, then you look at what's going on in private equity,
Mm-hmm.
which is even
Mm-hmm.
darker,
Mm-hmm.
because anything goes there.
12 legs.
So yeah, so you have that counterforce out there
Yeah.
as well. So again, all of these things are going on. We're caught in the middle of it. We can't stick our head in the sand. We can't say there's nothing we can do. Because if we do this right now, again, you look at what that documentary is saying about our field. You look at the statement that came out of the American Psychological Association 4 or 5 years ago, where they called us out. They were literally talking about taking people like myself who are members and kicking us out, saying that we're taking our knowledge, again, to manipulate people and to harm people. And it's part of your code of ethics is to do no harm. So,
Strong
I
message.
think we got to double down on that.
We definitely have to double down. I do want to talk about the future.
Yep.
So we did talk about with AI coming in, almost, Bill, you and I talked about like
Mhm.
all my clients are now AI enabled. Everybody's using AI. Talk to me about how do you see that impacting
Yeah.
us?
So, again, it's like any tool, I'll call it a tool.
Yeah.
Like any tool, it can be used, in very good ways. You can, think about learning applications where it's measuring students' performance and as we talk about scaffolding and building and support, but then, slowly tearing that support down as the AI senses that people are grasping the knowledge and, constantly ratcheting up the challenge and deepening the learning and all of that. We can do that. We can take this and embed it in, point of purchase displays at McDonald's so that we can improve the life of that person so they're not working, in that low wage job for the rest of their lives. So there are so many applications we can use it in healthcare, again, to improve health and wellness and all of that. But then there's a dark side of it where it can enable everything and it can
Yeah.
supercharge everything we just talked about.
Yeah.
One of the most depressing stories was, from a student from a number of years back was talking to me about, going to work for an AI, driven health startup. And she was so excited about these possibilities of improving health and wellness and outcomes and all of this and drug discovery and all of that. And then slowly what the company did is started shifting towards how are they going to use AI to delay and deny treatments.
And what we
Everything
just
that's in the
saw.
news right now, I'm
Exactly.
very sad what happened in the last week.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what's going on in the news that we're building technologies
To harm.
to enable that, to
Mm.
enable what these
Yeah.
people are again, no, explaining or understanding what
Yeah.
happened there because it was evil.
Yeah.
But again, we're enabling that. We're enabling that. So it's like anything else. It can enable tremendous good or it can do tremendous harm. And
And
we're the
then
ones and we're the ones that should be controlling that. And I fear that we're not. And again, they're going to follow the money. And it's sad that our healthcare system, and this is why people are so upset with our
yeah.
healthcare system right now, is they would rather pursue cost savings and profit than wellness and improved outcomes.
Which is really sad. And then
Oh,
to
which
your
is very sad. Which is
which is very sad.
which is very sad. So you got that part of it. The other part is it's going to reshape our profession. Um, I think you're going to just see it start at the bottom and it's going to work upstream. But the low level work that we do, and maybe this will keep the untrained from coming into our field
Right.
because the low level, kind of the grunt work that we've all done over the last, 20, 30, 40 years is going to go away. It's not
Well,
unlike what happened in the program. And, it's probably nice to capture this hindsight in this kind of perspective is if you think about the program as we built it in the late 90s, it was about usability engineering.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I would say for the first 5 years, 50, 60, 70% of our students went out and became usability engineers.
Yeah.
There's no such thing anymore.
Yeah.
It's gone
No.
away. It's automated tools came along, user testing and whatnot came along and replaced all of that. And the same thing right now, the low level research that we do now, gone. The low
Gone.
level data analysis that we do, gone.
Mhm.
The low level design, gone. Everybody's, again, talk to people at Apple, talk to people in, any of the leading, tech organizations, the initial design is all being done by AI. And then the designers pick it up and push it along. So all of that entry level and that bothers me, worries me. I think about, we were building out our undergraduate program that actually fulfill that need, and now that need's
Mm.
gone, and we have to talk to the students about that. It's going to be the high level stuff. It's going to be the hard stuff, and I remind students of that in 700. I said, yeah, I know you hate the fact that it's so hard, but be thankful that it's so hard. The fact that it's so hard and so contextual and it's so nuanced, that requires the human brain. It's going to be
Beautifully
really
said.
hard, not impossible, but really hard to train that. And so you better hope some aspects of our work are really hard. And again, I think that's the other part of this is we need to think about that as a profession.
And I love
It-
what
it-
you're saying with that.
yeah. Yeah. And how we prepare people for that.
And it's interesting because we started talking about like, first of all, your class was the hardest for me. I did cry a little, maybe a lot, but it's one of the things that I was telling you, Bill, right? Like you said, the more challenging it is, the more embedded in your brain it is. And
Yep.
16 years now after graduation, I remember everything you've taught
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. No.
So
And that's the thing. This is a real quick aside, but
yeah.
we talk about it in class. These are the discussions we're having in class. So it's again having the conversation
Yeah.
is I don't allow them to use AI in those reviews. And I said, because when you remove the effort, when you
Yeah.
remove that grappling with something that's
Yeah.
really difficult and
Yeah.
agonizing over it
Yeah.
and failing and figuring it out and pushing forward, you're not deepening the learning when you remove that. So
Absolutely.
I'm really fearful when we turn this all over to the machine, what's going to happen to the human brain? You
Yeah.
know,
We're
again,
already seeing some
the old
impacts.
adage, if
Yeah.
you don't use it, you lose it. And I
Yeah.
see it because we're seeing on the undergraduate level, we're seeing kids who've spent the last 3 years in high school using AI for their writing. They can't write.
No.
They can't think critically. They can't problem solve.
Yeah. No,
And
absolutely.
and what does that mean? What does that mean? What are the implications of that? So that's a whole other side of AI. Again, tremendous potential, but maybe I become a little tainted here. But I would like to think that people and humankind are going to use it to good, but I think there's always that pull to that dark side.
No, absolutely. And you said it, it's a tool. So
Yep,
it's up to us how we use that tool.
yep,
It's
absolutely.
and going back to the human factors, and I think you mentioned it, this is a calling for us to go to the more human factor side of it, to
Right.
understand the brain and the behaviors around it. So we do the hard stuff, which
Hmm.
AI right now is not connecting those dots and it's not
Yep,
doing those things. So
yep.
I
No.
love that messaging.
Yeah, and it's almost I hate to say this because we've been through so many name changes and shifts
Yeah.
and things like that, and people's heads are spinning. So
Yeah.
it's more the way we think about ourselves. But again, over the last 5 to 7 years, when people ask me what I do, I don't say I'm a UX professional. I've gone back to I'm a behavioral scientist.
Yeah. I love
I've
that.
gone back to that. I think people can understand that. I
People
think
can
people
understand that.
understand that. Now, again, there's danger in that as well, and this is where we're going to come full circle.
Yeah.
This is where again the deeper your understanding of all of this, the behavioral science and the neuroscience and the cognitive science and the perceptual sciences, it can all be used for good, and it can all be flipped.
Absolutely.
So again, it comes full circle here around ethical practice, okay?
Ethical
And and
practice.
and we have to commit to that, and we have to double down to that, and if we don't, we're dead.
And to that messaging that you had where your student was like, if I don't do it, someone else will do it. But my take to that is start the conversation.
Yeah, and I love the
Start
fact
it.
that
Yeah.
we're having these conversations in the
Yeah.
class, and this is where it needs to start. And
Absolutely.
I think this, and I'm not sure where you want to go next, so I'll let you take the lead.
Yeah.
But I think we're talking about, as we talk about the profession and we're talking about the future. And as I entered into this conversation, I said, I don't think we are a profession. What professions go through these growing pains, and they have these ugly periods, and then they mature.
Hmm.
And that's how they overcome these problems and these challenges where they come up with codes of ethics that they actually practice, and then they codify the practice.
Yeah.
And I think you and I talked about this when we were planning, but I was participating back in God, late 90s, early 2000s on a common body of knowledge for the
You
UPA at the
mentioned.
time. And we never completed it.
Because people couldn't agree, right?
We couldn't agree. We couldn't
Yeah.
agree. And then we finally just threw our hands up in the air and say it's something different to everybody else. And I'm going like, no, that's wrong. Because, when I look to the Bentley program, not saying we have everything right, but we bring people in that work in every imaginable industry and every imaginable kind of product and service design and architectural design. And we've defined a body of knowledge that works in all of those places that is human-centered.
Human-centered. Because
And
the
we
human
could have,
behaviors, yeah,
it's product agnostic, and it could have worked for the profession.
absolutely.
And part of the problem here is, and this is just, to me, it's one of the things that just amazes me, this many years later, is that, we were one of the first programs, if not the first program. There's still just a handful of programs, academic
Yeah,
programs and
yeah,
not-for-profit universities. There's still just a handful of programs. And you would think with the demand and the growth and all of that, there would have been a proliferation of programs that would have equaled that demand. You see
yeah,
that in marketing.
yeah.
Every business school in the country
Mm-hmm.
has a marketing program.
Yeah, yeah.
And look at it in engineering, and again, every major university has an engineering school.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that in our field.
No,
And you can stop me, but if you don't want me going here now, but
no, this,
I think this has to be said out loud. I think part of the problem that we've had in our field, and what we've done is we've commercialized the practice. Is the education of people has grown up in for-profit groups,
yep.
and where it is in the interest of, again, it's the profit making.
It's
It is the profit making. And again, not saying the academic world, we have many flaws, but at the end of the day, we don't keep the money. I don't keep the money. You don't keep the
no,
money. The university doesn't keep the money. Our goal is to break even. That's not it. If I was going out and doing a profit-making training group, I would design it very differently.
right?
And you can't have a profession built on that. You can have that to supplement it.
Yeah,
You can have that again, when you want to do your continued professional development. But we have to have everybody having some common agreed upon understanding of the field and these issues that we're talking about right now. That's what education does. I think a
yeah.
lot of what we see on the outside in the commercial groups, it's training. There's a
Mm-hmm.
difference between training and education. And again, professions, that's the hallmark of a profession, is they mature to a state where they have a reasonable, agreed upon common body of knowledge. Yes, you have your specialization. So let's look at medicine. People are board certified here
Mm-hmm.
and there, and we can have the same thing. We can have somebody board certified in service design or multimodal, this or, digital or physical or whatever. We can have those specializations, but everybody also has a common
It's the
certification.
base should be the common,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then there are branches. So
And we don't
Bill,
have that. People are all over
over
the
the
place.
place.
I look at the folks that come into our program, probably 40% have certifications,
Mm.
for-profit certifications. They're all over the place. They're all
And then
over
you
the
have to
place. And
start
some
from,
good, and there's good in the mix. I have
yeah,
to admit, there's good in the mix. But when you're scaling for
up,
profitability, you
yeah,
can't maintain quality.
yeah. And it's going back to some of these trainings are around like, oh, cut short the research because we don't have time for research. Let's just go out there and like see what's happening in the market, right? So,
Yeah, no, and you can't. And again, that I know that this will infuriate a lot of people, but we can't build a profession on podcasts.
no.
Okay. And 2-day seminars, even though I've taught 2-day seminars, I know that, but I've
Yeah.
never told people this is making you a professional. I was very,
No,
very
no.
upfront
It's a
about them, saying
supplemental
this is
knowledge.
this is the start of the journey. I
Yeah.
hope this motivates you. I hope this gives you a foundation, and I hope you continue. And I share this about myself, at the end of 45 years, is I'm still a student. It's never done.
It's
It's
never done.
never done. So I've tried to, myself personally, to be very transparent about that, but I don't think we see that yet. I don't think you see that,
No.
and it seems like every 10 years there's a new group of thought leaders that come along, who discover this for the first time because they haven't been through and say, we've captured this common body of knowledge, and yeah, it evolves and it's constantly changing, but there's some things about human behavior that don't change.
They
The
don't, they
things
don't.
I
Yeah.
learned, 45 years ago in grad school
Are
are
still
still
the same.
relevant,
Yeah.
today. But we keep rediscovering with each new generation of thought leader. We keep
Yeah.
rediscovering, like, they'll call me and they'll say, Bill, I want to teach in the program. I'm going like, I've had this insight, and I'm going like, frick, we've had that insight 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're discovering it, and you're now a recognized thought leader in the field.
And to your point, because if it's for profit, that's how they differentiate themselves.
That's exactly it. That's exactly
That's
it.
how,
So it's all about
exactly.
brand. It's all about
Yeah.
branding and making yourself
Yeah.
that thought leader, and
Yeah.
subscribe to this, attend that,
Right.
and I'll
And
share
who
my
make,
knowledge.
yeah,
Yep.
no, absolutely.
And you
And
can't build a profession that way.
you can't. You really can't.
And I
So,
think people, there'll be many people out there. I think this has to be said. And I can say it now as I'm walking out the door. Somebody has to say it. Somebody has to say it, because if we continue down this path, we're just going to continue to do this.
no, absolutely. And, going back to when we started about, last lecture.
Mhm.
So, Bill, we've talked about some amazing things, and I've taken, like, it's funny, I'm like writing down notes because I'm like, this is gold. But, some of the key takeaways for me have been around just, strength in numbers. I think that's really stuck in my head. If all of us just start having the conversation, like
Yeah.
some of us don't want to stick our neck out, and you're right, like, some of us are in positions where like I have to make money. I have a family.
Yeah, you have a
But
mortgage, you have a
you have a
family, and we
mortgage
and
and
we,
this
we
and
talk
that.
about, yeah.
We talk, but that doesn't stop you from having that conversation.
Yeah.
And if a lot of us start having that conversation, we can come together, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a coming together that I feel that's what you're saying. Like, and we haven't, we're going in all different directions.
Yeah, and we don't have the equivalent. Again, you look at, again, the American Marketing Association, the
Yeah.
American Medical
Yeah.
Association, again, not perfect bodies, the American Psychological
Yeah.
Association, none of them are perfect bodies.
Yeah.
But if you look at the maturity of those organizations versus, and again, I don't fault anybody who
Yeah.
volunteers their time for the UXPA, because I know they put hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of hours in there doing the best they can. But man, you look at the maturity of our group, 30 years later. I remember when Joe Dumas was, and Ginny Reddish were, organizing the first conference. I think it was in Portland, Maine, back in 1990. And so you look 35 years later, how far have we come?
Not
Not
very
not
far.
nearly as far as we need
Not
to.
nearly as far.
Yep.
So, Bill, if I were to ask you, what is your parting advice
Mm.
to us? What would it be?
I think, again, coming back around to, I come up with this very simple term, design for good. Is really refocus on that. I mean, this is why I got involved in all of this so many years ago, is that design can bring value to people's lives. Design can bring, accessibility and inclusion to people's lives. That, I mean, again, that you don't have, and I'm using those terms much broader than
Yeah.
that being used in contemporary world today, is that, again, we can't have marginalized people in the world today.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Everybody has to be included, and everybody has to be able to benefit from the value of what we build. And I think if we as a profession kind of double down on that, it'll be a counterforce. And the one thing we haven't talked about, and I'll do it very quickly here in the closing, is we haven't communicated, the value
Mm,
we bring. We haven't told these good stories. We're letting other people define us. We're letting other people tell the bad stories.
yeah.
We got to talk about the good that we bring to the world. That,
Yeah.
that we make technologies, accessible for the seeing impaired and hearing impaired and people with cognitive disabilities, and we've allowed the elderly to live, dignified, independent lives. That we include, excuse me, improve the the access to the legal system, the work that our students have done with the court systems here in Boston to make it more equitable for the most marginalized populations. We haven't told those stories.
And that's such a good message, right? Like there's a page we can take from marketing.
Yeah.
We have to package our own stories. We have to get out there.
Yeah, we're being rebranded right now by others, and it's not pretty. And that shouldn't be the case because, again, ending on a positive note is we do so much good. And I'm so proud of, each and every graduate of this program. I have the opportunity that, I have a good sense of where everybody is and where they've been over the years. And I'm saying, our graduates have made this better and that better, and it's almost like every aspect of the world has been touched by a Bentley grad and made better. And we need to communicate that very loudly.
We need to communicate and we need to celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Celebration is a good thing.
Well, with that, Bill, thank you so much. And you know what? The program is not going to be the same without you, but I know you've given it to some really capable people. I will miss you, but I know where you live. So I'm coming.
And I hope that happens.
It definitely will. And for the listeners, thank you again for joining the 6th installment of a monthly interview series. Stay tuned as each HFID board member has the privilege to continue these conversations with Bill each month until June 2025. So we will hear from you. We will be sharing each monthly interview on the last day of each month on our LinkedIn Bentley HFID alum and student network group page. And with that, Bill, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.